Many thanks to my supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to join them, check the link in the description. But now, enjoy the video. After my colossal video last December where I explained every weird and obscure race car throughout Super GT history, you may have thought that I was done with talking about cars from this series. However, that's not quite the case. Because, do you know what is the only thing stranger than some of the cars that raced in Super GT? The cars that didn't. Through researching for that previous video, I discovered that there are many examples of unusual and unexpected cars that at one point had been slated to appear in this series. So in today's video, I'm aiming to uncover these forgotten stories as we dive into the various cars and teams that were planning to race in Super GT, but never did. In total, I've amassed 16 of the very best examples that have been mentioned in various interviews, articles, and even official entry lists. Although there are countless more entries that didn't come to fruition, I'm mainly focusing on models which never appeared in Super GT, or cases where their backstory is rather interesting. These range from real cars that even raced in other events, to planned entries that only ever existed on paper. As far as I'm aware, many of these stories have never been covered beyond the Japanese side of the internet, so I'm really excited to share them with you all. My hope is that even if you're the biggest die-hard fan of Super GT, through this video you'll learn something that you didn't know before. Alright, let's kick things off by heading back to the mid-90s. The first official season of the All Japan GT Championship was held in 1994, and although it included some very interesting models, it could have been even more international. Japanese Corvette dealership West Racing had announced their intention to enter the series. In fact, they were even present at the pre-season test with a C4 Corvette, although this was an unmodified road car that effectively served as just a placeholder. Interestingly, the drivers were going to be two Toyota Works veterans, Kaoru Hoshino and Masanori Sekiya. Originally, West had intended to build their car in Japan, but with their planned entry in round 3 of the season fast approaching, a change of tack was necessary. Instead, they commissioned a car directly from General Motors, as well as purchased a second ex-IMSA GTS chassis from the US to use in endurance races. Both cars were flown into Japan, but delays meant that the newly built car didn't arrive in time for their one-off JGTC entry. However, the ex-IMSA car would compete at the Suzuka 1000 km in the GT1 class later that year, but it retired after just 24 laps. At the same time, West Racing continued working on their own C4 ZR1, so it's said that at one point they actually had 3 Corvette race cars in total. After their failed entry the previous year, they were planning another crack at the JGTC in 1995, with Naoki Hattori supposedly being one of the drivers. However, lacking sponsorship, they were unable to confirm their entry, and a shortage of funding ultimately put a stop to their racing efforts altogether. A C4 Corvette would eventually compete in the JGTC in 2002, entered by Zip Speed in GT300, but it failed to qualify for a single race. During 1994, it also emerged that the Japanese arm of General Motors was considering an entry into the series. Technically, they had been involved with the JGTC from its very first race. They provided the pace cars that were used in the inaugural event at Fuji Speedway. Whilst this was initially just a promotional deal, paddock rumours at the time suggested that they were seriously considering a full entry. It's believed that they were planning to base their car not on the Corvette, but rather the latest Camaro Z28. The most likely way they would have entered is by providing direct support to an existing outfit, rather than setting up their own GM Works team. An entry in 1994 was suggested, but 1995 seemed more likely. However, both seasons came and went without GM Japan ever showing up, and it seems like their enthusiasm for the series cooled off beyond this point. In the end, the only time that a Camaro would ever compete in the JGTC was through a one-off appearance in 1997. Although in that case, it was a Trans Am style machine that was built and run by a private outfit. Another team that was planning on one-off entry was Test and Service. At the time, they were racing the famous Puma-liveried Mitsubishi GTO in the N1 Endurance Series, what's known today as Super Taikyu, and this is the exact car that they also wanted to use in the JGTC in 1994. For this entry, they were preparing to enhance the car with wider tyres, as well as a weight reduction of around 100 kilograms thanks to an aluminium bonnet and doors. Unfortunately, the team would encounter major engine issues during the N1 endurance round at Tsukuba, and this resulted in them pulling out of their Spot GT entry at Sportsland Sugo. The GTO would of course never compete in this series, which is a real shame. In N1, it was known for being the only real opposition to the all-conquering GTRs, with Test and Service effectively operating as a Mitsubishi works team. In current day, the Puma GTO is quite well remembered, so despite never racing in the JGTC, it still managed to become a legend in its own right. Moving on to 1995, prior to the start of the season, a number of teams announced their intention to race certain cars in the series, and many of them never quite made it to the track. Amuze Racing had competed the previous year in an X-Super Sedan FC RX-7, and for 1995, they were looking to build a bespoke GT machine. The car they were planning to use as a basis was the 4th generation Eunos Cosmo. Sketches of what the final car could have looked like were previewed in a Japanese magazine, the source of which I sadly can't confirm. Their plan was to compete in the top GT1 class starting from round 2 of the season. However, it doesn't seem like the project got that far. Instead, Amuze would race their RX-7 a few more times in 1995, before the Cosmo was quietly shelved for unknown reasons. As we know, the Eunos Cosmo never raced in the JGTC, but that's not true for its engine. Starting from 1997, Aria Memia swapped the 20B3 rotor into their FD RX-7, and continued using it through to their final season in 2010. During this time, they would win 11 races, as well as the GT300 Championship in 2006. Another Japanese sports coupe from the 90s was the Subaru Alcyone SVX, and it too was planned to enter the JGTC this year. First reported in the November 1994 issue of Autosport Japan, SYMS Racing Team were the ones behind this project. Although it was going to be a private entry, SYMS did have ties to Subaru through its parent company, so it could be considered a semi-works effort. The article specifies that their intention was to use a turbocharged EJ20 engine developed from the Impreza WRC car, with a target of around 370 horsepower. The base car would have been converted from front-wheel drive to rear-wheel drive, and it would have raced in the GT2 class. Bear in mind that the image shown here is an illustration that was drawn up just for the magazine. At the time that this was published, SYMS hadn't actually received the funding to develop the car, and so financing is the most likely reason why it never came to be. Instead, SYMS would build a car for the JTCC, a rear-wheel drive non-turbo Impreza wagon, which they campaigned unsuccessfully through to that series' demise at the end of 1998. When a Subaru did eventually compete in the JGTC at the end of 1997, it was also an Impreza. Incredibly, just like the Eunos Cosmo, the SVX's engine is going to be used in a different model racing in Super GT. For the 2026 season, R&D Sport have transplanted the EG33 Flat 6 into their BRZ GT300. Whilst it is based on the block from the SVX, the internals have been entirely replaced with modern racing components, with a pair of turbochargers added for good measure. Of course, the irony of this is that SYMS' original plan for their SVX included using an EJ20, the exact same engine that could be found in R&D Sport's BRZ until this year. At the 1994 Le Mans 24 Hours, an Alpine A610 was entered privately by Legier Sports Mécanique in the GT2 category. This car would go on to finish the race in 13th overall and 5th in class. The following year, it was imported to Japan with the intention of racing it in the JGTC. The story goes that Renault specialists Atelier SiFo were the ones behind the project. Already having experience importing Renaults to Japan, they handled the process of getting the car into the country, with ownership of it falling to IT company Wise Corporation. The plan was to jointly enter the car into the GT1 category, but sponsor withdrawals delayed this. Eventually, it got to the point where it was felt that the car would no longer be competitive as the level of the series improved, and so the plan was abandoned. For the owner of SiFo, Teruhisa Fuji, the idea of racing in the JGTC persisted, and this culminated in him entering a Renault Sport Spider in GT300 in 1997. First seen in round 4 of 1995 was this Mitsubishi Mirage entered by Eimei Auto, based on a former one-make race car. But prior to the start of the season, team owner and driver Akira Nagai had announced his intention of building a new car. As reported in issue number 108 of Racing On magazine, the model he was planning to use was the Mitsubishi FTO. Just like he had done with the Mirage, the idea was to swap the engine to a 2-litre 4G63 unit from the Lancer Evo, while still keeping the car front-wheel drive. However, when the guy was interviewed by GT Inside Reports later that year, his plan had become less clear. He stated that next year he'll either go with the FTO or an Eclipse. Given that the Eclipse came with a 4G63 as standard, in his mind it would be easier to use that instead of trying to squeeze the engine into an FTO, which normally has a shorter V6 or the smaller 4G93. In the end though, neither of these cars would make it to the track, as after one more outing for the Mirage in 1996, Eimei Auto was never seen in the series again. Ironically, an FTO with a 4G63 would be entered into GT300 by Mitsubishi Ralliart, competing in both 1998 and 1999. Now, moving on to the 1997 season, let's talk about the Toyota MR2. This car had been raced in GT300 from the previous year, so why am I mentioning it here? Well, that's because there was a radical plan to race the car in GT500. Katsunori Ikeya's Cobra racing team had already competed in the series with a Porsche 911 for the past 2 seasons. But as was disclosed in issue number 235 of Racing On magazine, the team were in the midst of designing and building their own GT500 MR2. The plan was to fit the car with a 3.4-litre inline-6 engine from a Toyota Land Cruiser, and tuning from Ogawa Motors expected to increase its output to around 400 horsepower. For a GT500 car, that would have made it somewhat underpowered, but that's where the lightweight nature of the MR2's chassis would have come in. The team applied for special approval to race the car at just 1,050 kilograms, a full 100 kilos lighter than its prospective competitors. Doing this would have allowed the car to have a similar power-to-weight ratio as the other GT500s, and thus at least give Cobra Racing a decent chance against the works teams. Apparently, there were even plans to build a second chassis as well. The car got as far as appearing on the official entry list for round 2 of the season at Fuji, where it was listed as the RF Legion MR2. This reflected the team's partnership with Formula Nippon outfit Legion. Sadly, the car was a no-show, and Cobra Racing continued entering Porsches in GT300 instead. After this, the project quietly fizzled out. But when it comes to highly modified MR2s racing in GT500, they weren't the only ones planning to do this. The Sard MC8-R is a GT1 car that competed at Le Mans in both 1995 and 1996. Based on an MR2, the rear end was rebuilt with a pipe frame construction, and housed a tuned 4-litre V8 from the Lexus LS400. For 1997, it was modified even further, and in preparation for a third attempt at Le Mans, Sard stated their interest in racing it in the JGTC alongside their usual Supra. The third MC8-R chassis had already raced in Japan at the 1996 Suzuka 1000 km, and it was this car that was planned for a GT500 entry. In the end, this never materialized, and whilst Sard didn't deny the possibility of racing it in the JGTC at a later point, this never happened. I can't find any concrete sources stating why, but I have a feeling that the third chassis burning to a crisp at the Suzuka 1000 km later that year is part of the reason. The Mercedes CLK-LM was a dominant force in the FIA GT Championship in the late 90s. In fact, you could say that its overwhelming speed ultimately killed the category, as every other GT1 manufacturer pulled out at the end of 1998. As the CLK-LM was now surplus, short-lived Japanese internet service provider MTCI worked out a deal with Mercedes to purchase a chassis from them to use in the JGTC. This story first emerged during 1999, with MTCI seeing it as a golden opportunity to enter GT500 with their own team. As a cutting-edge GT1 machine, it was felt that the car had real potential to upset the works GT500 manufacturers, especially with massive corporate funding behind it. Although their entry didn't materialize in 1999, the story rumbled on into 2000. In March, Autosport Japan published an article about the plan, which also confirmed that one-time F1 driver Marco Apicella had been signed up. However, the CLK-LM deal ultimately fell through on the eve of the season. Reportedly, there was an issue between Mercedes and the importer, which resulted in the former no longer being willing to part ways with the car. Although it was never officially confirmed, it's strongly speculated that Mercedes' CLR Le Mans disaster the previous year was a key factor in their reluctance to finalise the deal, first delaying it to 2000 before reneging completely. By this point, the MTCI racing team had already been established, with most of the team members and sponsors in place. As such, they decided to pivot their entry to GT300 using a Porsche Boxster with a 911 GT2 engine. Regardless, MTCI, who also sponsored Benetton in F1, would fall into bankruptcy partway through the year, and their racing team was shuttered at the end of the season. Since then, the only time a Mercedes has ever competed in GT500 was thanks to HKS and their privately built CLK that raced a few times throughout 2002. For the final round of the 2000 season at Suzuka, a new name appeared on the entry list in GT300, Team KKD Japan with MTG. And the car they were entering with? A Renault. That's it. Yes, the exact model of Renault was never specified. The car didn't turn up at Suzuka, and being such an obscure entry, there are no images of it to be found. As such, it's not publicly known what it was supposed to be. In fact, the only information that we know for certain comes from that provisional entry list published by the series itself. The car number was 888, and it would have run on Michelin tyres. As for the drivers, they were going to be Junichi Yamanishi and Takeshi Namakawa, who happens to be the CEO of brake parts supplier Project Mu. From my research, I wasn't able to find any information on who KKD Japan or MTG are either. I think that this is undoubtedly the weirdest story in this list. How can a car be entered into an event, and yet nobody knows what type of car it was supposed to be? Some people have even speculated that it never existed at all, given the lack of evidence. However, I personally believe that's not the case. By 2000, the JGTC was a far more professional series than it was just a few years prior. As such, I find it very unlikely that they would accept an entry from an upstart team whose car may or may not actually exist. So, in this case, we need to do a bit of detective work. Beyond the entry list, the only information I was able to find out about the background of this car is from a Japanese blog post. The author states that the model was most likely a Clio, and the reason why there are no images of it is because it was totaled in a testing accident, which also explains why it never raced. Now, normally I wouldn't give much thought to unsubstantiated rumours like these, but I found this blog to actually be a pretty reliable source of information. It's helped me a great deal with other entries in this video. As for supporting evidence, I was able to find something interesting in the Racing Sports Cars archive. Along with the details that we already know, here they mention the Renault L7X. Now, L7X is not a model name, but rather an engine code. It's a 3-litre V6 that was used in various Renaults, including the Clio V6. This car didn't enter production until 2001, but a couple of years before that, Renault built the Clio V6 Trophy as a one-make race car. Not only that, but I know for a fact that a few of these cars ended up in Japan courtesy of SiFo. This image taken at their workshop in September 2000 shows two of them either side of their Spider GT300. If you played the game Gran Turismo 3, then this might be familiar, as the Clio V6 race car in here is adorned with SiFo logos, meaning that it's likely based on one of these cars. So yes, my personal theory is that this mystery GT300 Renault was a Clio V6 trophy which was imported into the country by SiFo and then entered in the JGTC by this unknown KKD Japan with MTG entity. Of course, this is merely an educated guess based on rumours, so do not take it as absolute fact. Team Goh famously won the GT500 title in 1996 with a McLaren F1 GT-R, before leaving the series after a dispute with the organisers surrounding additional weight handicaps. Well, at the end of 2005, they announced their comeback to the rebranded Super GT Championship for the following year. Their plan was to enter a Maserati MC12 GT1, a car which had just dominated the FIA GT Championship. Along with this, they had put together an all-star driver lineup that featured 2004 Le Mans winner Seiji Ada, as well as former F1 racer Jan Magnussen. The car first appeared in a pre-season test at Suzuka Circuit under the team name Stile Corse, and it featured various enhancements compared to its GT1 spec. These included a larger front splitter and rear wing, as well as carbon brakes. However, in spite of these improvements, the car was totally outclassed by the bespoke GT500s. Whilst the MC12 showed good straight line performance, it was getting left behind in the corners. By this point, the GT500 cars were permitted to have pretty substantial modifications from their base models, and so they could generate much more downforce than a typical production-based GT car. Realizing how far off the pace they were, Team Goh elected to skip the first race of the season to give them more time to develop the car. But beyond this point, nothing more was ever heard about the project, and when Ara was signed mid-season to replace Eric Comas at Kondo Racing, that pretty much confirmed that the MC12 wasn't going to race. Since then, the only time Team Goh was raced in Super GT was in the 2019 season with a McLaren 720S. And as far as European GT1 cars racing in GT500 are concerned, the few teams that did attempt it discovered exactly what Team Goh already knew, that they were totally outmatched. Another European car that was planned to appear in 2006 was the Mercedes SL350. The background behind this is that Team Reckless, who had been competing in GT300 for a number of years with a Toyota MRS, approached APR to commission them to build a new car. Regarding the choice of base model, Reckless was a Japanese company that sold luxury imported vehicles, so they felt that using the SL would be more appropriate for their image. This story was only fully uncovered in the July 2020 issue of Autosport Japan. Here you can see blueprints for the car's design, which include its dimensions and overall layout. Reportedly, the design process was carried out using an SL350 road car as a basis, which the head of APR had borrowed from a friend for the weekend. The plan included the use of a naturally aspirated 3.5-litre V6 engine. However, this wouldn't be based on the one from the road car. Instead, Ogawa Motors were contracted to create a bespoke racing engine from scratch. From the sounds of it, APR got pretty far into design work for the car, so how come the final product was never seen? Well, this car was actually a victim of the team's success. In 2005, Reckless won the GT300 championship with drivers Kota Sasaki and Tetsuya Yamano. Having achieved their goal, they then set their sights on an even bigger prize. For the following year, they teamed up with Serumo to contest the Formula Nippon Championship. Now without a customer team and having no desire to race the car themselves, APR ended up scrapping the work they had completed, and that was that. Apparently, had it been made, the SL350 would have reused various parts from APR's previous mid-engined cars, like the Goraya and MRS. Considering the differences between the FR and MR drivetrains, as well as the fact that this would have been their first ever FR car, it's unlikely that the SL would have been super competitive. Even so, it still would have been a pretty fascinating sight in GT300. It wasn't until 2012 that Mercedes was finally seen in this class by way of their SLS AMG GT3. Cusco Racing were a mainstay of the GT300 grid throughout the late 90s and 2000s with their unique Subaru Imprezas. By 2008, the car had been pretty optimized, featuring an asymmetrical all-wheel drive system and bespoke Dunlop tyres designed just for it. Initially, the team were planning to replace it with a new machine based on the latest third-generation Impreza from round 3 that year. In the end, the old car would see out the season, but the team still confirmed their intent to bring an all-new challenger for the following year. Unfortunately, this would never happen though, as Cusco pulled out of the series in 2009 to focus on rally and dirt trial events instead. Since then, they've still yet to return to GT racing. However, if we once again have a read of Autosport Japan's July 2020 issue, we can discover something pretty incredible. This magazine includes a section that dissects various rumours and urban legends surrounding Super GT, of which the previous SL350 was one of them. However, the standout unveiling here is easily case file number 1. Here we can find a never-before-seen set of images showing an early prototype of what was planned to be Cusco's 2009 GT300 car. There's a lot to take in here. So the current Impreza at the time was a hatchback, rather than the sedan body style of its predecessor. However, this car is clearly neither of those. It is unmistakably a two-door prototype-style machine, in a similar vein to the Mooncraft Shiden. In its previous guise, the Impreza's biggest weakness was undoubtedly its shape. The car was quite tall and boxy, and so didn't have a great aerodynamic profile, nor an ideal centre of mass. This car, with its low and aggressive profile, would have completely changed that. The way that the front wheel arches tower over the bonnet is what I find most impressive. Despite all of this, underneath it would have been very similar to the old car. It was planned to use the same all-wheel drive system, and although the engine wasn't specified, it's highly likely that the EJ20 would have been carried over as well. The compact nature of the Flat 4 means that, as unbelievable as it seems, this car would have likely also been front-engine, something that makes it even more unusual. Anyway, there's no doubt that the model we can see here is a very early concept design. It lacks many aero details such as a splitter and rear wing, all of the air intakes are filled in, and the windows are blacked out, most likely to hide the fact that it has no interior. As stated in the article, it seems likely that this model was intended to be shown as a preview at the Tokyo Auto Salon in early 2009, prior to the real car being unveiled. But with Cusco ending their Super GT program, it never was, and instead, this model was scrapped not long after these photos were taken. Had it actually made it to the track, there's no doubt that it would have been a very controversial machine. The only things that it retains from the road car are the lights and front grille. Because of this, it suggested that Cusco named it the Impreza Concept to try and sidestep any issues surrounding its legality. Had it been made, this truly would have been a GT car like no other. Could it have fought for the GT300 title? If Cusco were able to get it working properly, there's no doubt in my mind that it would have been a contender, subject to any handicaps that may have been applied. Sadly, these few images are the only evidence we have that a car like this ever existed. In 2012, it was announced that Super GT would be visiting South Korea the following year for an exhibition race at the Korea International Circuit, the track that was created to host the Korean Grand Prix. As part of this event, there was a strong desire for a Korean team to be on the grid, and it was soon announced that this would be the case. Solite Indigo Racing were a major player in the Korean motorsport scene, having won several titles in what was previously called the BAT GT Championship. The team was founded by a Hyundai parts supplier, and so it's no surprise that they almost always raced cars from that brand. In September of 2012, Indigo Racing confirmed their entry into what would be known as the Super GT All-Star in Korea event. The model they were going to compete with was a Hyundai Genesis Coupe built to GT300 regulations, and they were planning to also field a Korean driver who had yet to be named. Sadly, in April 2013, just 1 month before it was due to take place, the Super GT event in Korea was postponed before being cancelled entirely. Since then, the series has still yet to race in the country. Now, it's possible that you may have seen images of this car floating around on the internet, purporting to be either a show car that previewed Indigo Racing's GT300 entry, or even the final GT300 car itself. However, the truth is a bit more complicated. After doing some research, I was able to piece together the backstory of this machine. The car first appeared publicly at the 2010 Korean Motorsports Grand Festival, a standalone event that took place 2 years before the Super GT race was announced. On that occasion, it actually won the GT class final against rivals that included a Toyota Supra and Porsche 996 GT3. Beyond this point though, it doesn't seem like the car ever raced again, and was only brought out for occasional demo runs. But it was exhibited at a few events such as the Seoul Motor Show, where more information about it was revealed. It was built in 2009 and sported a 4-litre Hyundai engine making about 430 horsepower. Here we can also see its official name, the Genesis Coupe 4.0 GT. As has been reported by various sources, this car is actually based on the Wedsport Bando Celica GT300, a machine that itself was derived from Toyota's pre-2003 GT500 Supra. It seems like Indigo Racing took the Celica, swapped out its 3S GTE engine for a Hyundai one, and then created new bodywork that resembles the Genesis Coupe road car. From this timeline, we can determine that the car was not designed specifically for the 2013 Korean Super GT event, but rather the 2010 Korean Motorsports Grand Festival, the only time that it ever raced. In fact, this car being based on a Super GT car, and then the later emergence of the Super GT race in Korea, seem to be totally unrelated. That said, as a result of this coincidence, the car did actually appear on official posters for the events prior to its cancellation, but there is some dispute as to whether it would have actually raced, or a new car would have been used instead, possibly based on the GTA mother chassis concept. Either way, the end result was the same, and after this event was cancelled, the car was seemingly forgotten. Doing research on Solite Indigo Racing, one thing I noticed is that they don't seem to recognise that this car ever existed. For example, I found this video they made which runs through the evolution of their race cars over the years, but the GT300 Genesis is mysteriously absent. To me, this really confirms the fact that it was not an originally designed car, but instead based on an existing GT300 as is strongly rumoured. There has never been a proper Hyundai Super GT machine, unless you count the fictional GT500 Genesis from the Forza games. But with the series looking to expand into the rest of Asia, maybe it will happen one day. And now we come to the final entry in this video. The Toyota Prius became an unlikely racing icon when it was turned into a Super GT machine by APR in 2012. Initially featuring the same mid-mounted V8 engine from Toyota's LMP1 machine at the time, the car gradually evolved over the years, winning several races and coming close to the GT300 title multiple times. As a result of rule changes, in 2019 the Prius became front-engined, just like the road car. As we touched on before, after their SL350 didn't come to fruition, APR had never actually built an FR race car, so the Prius PHV GR Sport was their very first. But despite a memorable win at Autopolis in 2021, the car struggled badly, and it was eventually replaced with a new model based on the Lexus LC500H for 2023. However, as was revealed by the boss of APR, Hiroto Kaneso, this was not the original plan. Despite the GT300 car's poor performance, Kaneso was a big supporter of racing the Prius in Super GT, and so were Toyota as it allowed them to showcase their hybrid technology. In late 2022, the 5th generation Prius road car was revealed. And with this new Prius having a sportier design, it just made sense for APR to build a new GT300 car based on it. APR agreed with Toyota to do exactly this, with the new car due to debut in the 2023 season. But there was a problem. As a consequence of global events, including the ongoing semiconductor shortage at the time, production of the road car had to be pushed back. This delay meant that APR wouldn't have enough time to design and build the race car for the start of the season. But as the new Prius would still go on sale in 2023, Toyota wouldn't allow APR to continue racing their old car beyond that point. As such, their hands were tied. They had to introduce a new car, but it wasn't possible to use the new Prius. At the same time, they still had the requirement from Toyota to race a hybrid model, and thus the Lexus LC500H was eventually chosen. However, for fans of the Prius, all hope may not be lost. The Lexus LC500 is due to end production this year, meaning that it's unlikely that APR will continue racing it beyond this season. So if they need to build a new car for 2027, and assuming that Toyota still wants it to be a hybrid model, I think that there's a very good chance that the 5th generation Prius will finally race in Super GT. If that does end up happening, 1, I called it, but also 2, that will make its entry in this video kind of outdated. But for now, that's a wrap. I hope you've enjoyed this exploration into some of the cars that never quite made it onto the Super GT grid. Of course, this is far from a complete list. Given just how obscure some of these entries were, I have no doubt that there are many more out there that I'm simply not aware of. Through making this video, I stumbled across rumours of various different cars being planned to race in this series. From a TVR Cerbera, to a De Tomaso Pantera, and even a Class 1 Mercedes DTM car. However, in each case I wasn't able to find any concrete information on them, so if you know anything more than I do, please let me know about it down below. For now, thanks for watching and have a good one.